When you're pitching a book to a specific literary agent, how personal is too personal? Should you research every author they represent, stalk them on IG, and tailor your query letter to their manuscript wishlist? Or is your time better spent on other parts of your application? It's easy to get lost in the weeds, so let's figure out the best approach together. In this video, I'll share expert advice on when personalizations matter and how to avoid being overly intrusive. A key part of any application process is finding a way to stand out from the herd. One natural way is by personalizing. Since agents provide so much information about who they represent, the genres they're interested in, classes they teach, interviews, I think we need some guidance. Fortunately, we have another wonderful article by Friedman all about this topic. Jane worked in acquisitions for a publisher, so she's a wonderful resource to draw upon. This paragraph stood out to me. Whenever something came in that demonstrated the writer or agent understood what we published and could explain why the proposed book was a good fit, I immediately paid close attention and put more thought and care into my response. That makes perfect sense. It shows that the author or agent have taken some initiative. So Jane is very in favor of personalizations and has provided us with a 4-point list. Point number 1. If the agent has said they don't like personalizations, don't do it. This one is pretty self-explanatory. Ignoring their wishes is a very bad first impression. Number 2, if your personalization is weak, don't bother. Some people customize their queries by saying something like, I see from Writer's Marketplace that you're looking for thrillers. Well, so what? That's not particularly convincing or interesting information to the agent. It doesn't say anything about you or your work that they wouldn't pick up from the rest of the query. As I've shown in plenty of query examples, it's much more efficient to just list your genre along with the title of your book. There's no need to repeat that elsewhere. Some writers will try to go a step further, look at the agent's submission guidelines, website, or blog, and then insert the agent's own language into their query as a way to personalize the letter. Again, you're telling the agent something they already know. At best, it's probably neutral information. At worst, it could be annoying. Here, I think you could find more of a strategic balance. Jane continues, however, there can be ways to do this that are charming or effective. For instance, I follow your blog, and I know that you are currently looking for paranormal romances without vampires or werewolves, and want to offer my novel for your consideration. This is a bit of a wink and a nod here, and it's unlikely to be annoying to an agent who likely appreciates someone is paying close attention. Again, be specific. Number 3, avoid being too personal or chummy. Sometimes it's great to open with a paragraph that acknowledges that you met the agent, conversed on social media, or had some other kind of interaction. When you mention this sort of thing, you mainly want to do it to spark their memory. Oh right, I remember this person from the San Francisco pitch event. But it's possible to go too far and evoke a coziness that isn't really appropriate. For example, avoid, we chatted briefly at the San Francisco Writers Conference reception where I bought you a glass of Merlot. I hope your 2 schnauzers didn't miss you too much. I can't bear to be away too long from mine. It must be hard to travel so much for your work. Better. We chatted briefly at the San Francisco Writers Conference reception, and later I pitched you such and such work. I'm following up with the requested materials. Jane's advice boils down to, don't be creepy. Remember, this is a professional solicitation for a business partnership. Keep the tone appropriate. Number 4, do mention specific books represented or published, but don't overly flatter. Avoid buttering up or flattering the agent to a degree that makes you look silly or subservient. Talk about their list or their clients in a way that shows you have a knowledge of the literary landscape or that appreciates their place in it. This works best if you can be specific rather than saying something that could be lifted and placed into any query letter for any agent editor. Again, you're seeking a professional relationship with this person. You want that to start out on a good foundation. The next article I want to get into is by Query 101. First off, there's one type of personalization you should always have, the agent's name. Spell it right, use the right pronouns, use the right form of address, and make sure that when you send off a query letter, it's got the correct name on it. Try your best to do this accurately every time you send a query. Once again, autocorrect is not your friend. Be very, very careful. This article emphasizes that a key thing to mention in personalizations are referrals, but do not forge these. There's a good section in this article about MSWLs. If it's very obvious that your manuscript meets a wishlist ask, you don't need to mention it. Don't take up precious words in your query reciting the agent's requests back to them. I understand the urge to be like, ooh, I did my homework, but it's not going to come across the way you think. That said, if the agent is requesting something and it's not obvious that your book features it from the summary, go ahead and mention it. That might catch their attention. This article takes a similar stance to Jane's. Don't include a personalization if it's weak. You're better off without it. I love how this article closes. Don't sweat personalizations too much. You can also personalize some queries and not others. There are so many time-consuming aspects of query submissions that you don't want to get bogged down with things that won't make a big difference. Now let's check in with some other aspiring authors. In this case, on Reddit. This user writes, feeling like a fool for spending hours personalizing a query letter. Why bother if the agent is going to reject based solely on the premise or the pages? Why not leave the bonding part for the call whenever it comes? I start to feel like I have no obligation to waste my time reading agent's bio other than to make sure they represent in my genre and category. This part of the post especially stood out to me. I received a rejection less than a day after querying, even though I'd felt so many things based on the agent's wish list, resonating with my story, and even our movie, TV show interests matched. I felt so cheesy to say the last part, but while I was writing the personalized query, I felt like she could be my dream agent. You can see how easy it is to get caught up emotionally in this process. It's only natural. I like this user's response. I did okay with very small personalizations. It was basically, as your MSWL says, you are looking for X, Y, and Z, etc. It's a 5-ish minute thing per agent, and that adds up. Sadly, even if your interests and content match, if the agent does not believe they can sell your book for whatever reason, you will not get requests. And here's some good insight from the other side of the coin. Hey, I used to work at a literary agency, and I read all the queries. Here's my 2 cents. I could tell the difference between a genuine personalization and a generic one. So unless you know their client's work, have read or listened to interviews, or have a specific MSWL you're matching with, skip the personalization and go straight to the story. We get it. It's a numbers game. I read all the queries with the same gusto, but I was sadder to reject the ones that had done the work and the research. I wish I could have personalized those, but there were too many queries. Please know, it's not a rejection of you. An agent with a full list will only take on a handful of clients a year. They have to love your story and know how to sell it. There were books we loved and have stayed with me that we simply didn't know how to position. All right, so where does that leave me? I've gathered all the pieces of my application and I've found the agents I want to target. So how do I use the advice of those articles and decide whether or not I want to personalize? Well, for starters, my handy dandy spreadsheet has a personalization column. And you can see some of these have entries. Not all of them are very applicable. For example, wordplay and using genre to explore is way too vague, whereas this agent specifically mentioned liking multi-POVs, which makes her appealing for me. And in this case, I even included a specific note, do not personalize. So how did I find that out? If you look at this agent's wish list, she's very articulate and specific, but at no point does she mention she doesn't want the query personalized. Fortunately, I found this interview with the agent. How should authors query you, and what do you want to see in the query letter? I don't particularly care about the personalization because I can usually tell why someone is submitting me right off the bat, but I do love a clear and strong voice. I always enjoy when I can see the author's personality coming through. These are the details to pay attention to. They give you the opportunity to tailor your query in a way that will be more receptive. Taking a look at another agent's MSWL, what are some personalizations we could consider? She mentions a number of relevant authors and books, so that's a great place to start. Are any of these suitable comps? Does she represent any of these authors? This is where the research part of it comes in. In terms of my own book, this sentence stood out to me. Bonus points if it's more optimistic than not. This is a good indication that grimdark is not the right fit for this agent. But rather than include a sentence about how my story has a rosy outlook, I should demonstrate that. Show, not tell. With a cursory glance, I don't think I should spend too much time coming up with a personalization for this agent, and that's okay. Here's a final example. This passage stood out to me, specifically, Robin Hobb's series is one of my favorites. It's such a rich world, but with such incredible characterizations. With this agent, it might make sense to include a sentence about my aspiration to capture the complexity that Robin did with her multi-POV story. Statements like, there's something about being transported by a story, and I love that feeling of disappearing into someone else's world. Once again, I think you're much better off showing, not telling. Rather than asserting my book will take you away into a magical world, I want to tease qualities that suggest that. So I think this process demonstrates how much you can overthink things. You could spend weeks on a single agent trying to come up with just the right personalization, and I don't think that's a good use of your time. Personalize when there's an obvious reason to do so, when you feel compelled to. I'd argue I haven't found a compelling personalization yet in any of these examples, but maybe that's on me. Personalizations or not, I need to get these applications out and stop sitting on my ass. And unless things move a lot quicker than I anticipate, while I'm waiting for responses from agents, I may start to look into the world of self-publishing, trying to better understand it.